So far when we've been working with Java, we've been working with individual variables, but sometimes working with individual variables can be kind of a challenge. So for example, if we go ahead and build a new file here called variable test, let's go ahead and declare our class, public class, variable test, and we'll go ahead and put a main method in, public static void main. So once we've got a main method, we can actually get user input. Import java util.scanner, and we'll declare our scanner. Now, if we want to retrieve user input, let's say we want to build a simple addition program. So let's go ahead and ask the user for a couple of different integers. So we will say system.out.println, enter an integer. And we'll get that. Int a is equal to, we'll go ahead and say a0 is equal to in.nextInt, system.out.println, enter another integer. Int a1 is equal to in.nextInt, system.out.println, the sum of those is a0 plus a1. So now we have a simple calculator that will give us some sums. So if we hit Control X and javac variable test.java, compile that, if we've made no typos, we can go ahead and run it. So let's say 4 and 3, we get 7. So this works really well. But what if we want to change this so we add another integer? Well, now we have to go ahead and add another line, system.out.println, enter another integer. Int a2 is equal to in.nextInt. And we have to add that here. All right, so this will work. And if we run our program, we'll say 1, 2, and 3, and we get 6. All right, what if we want to add another integer? In fact, what if we wanted to add 50 more integers? Now we get into a harder problem because we're rewriting code over and over again. But fortunately, Java has a mechanism in place that we can use. Java gives us the ability to use arrays. So an array in Java is a special variable type that gives us the ability to declare a group of variables. So if we want to say int a is equal to new int, and let's say we'll pick 5 of these, now we can do the same code. We could say system.out.println, enter an integer, and we could say a0. So now notice we're using these brackets to identify the 0 element, which is, we start counting from 0 in computers. We always start with 0, then we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it's the way it is. You know, it just helps us to understand the actual counting. If we're looking at the binary numbers, we start with 0, then 1, 2, 3, so on. So it just makes more sense. Pretty much all languages use the 0 except for, I think, Visual Basic starts with 1. But when we're working with arrays, we typically start with 0. So we could say a0 is equal to in.nextInt. We could say system.out.println, enter another integer. a1 is equal to in.nextInt. But this isn't really a whole lot better than what we had before, even though we're using the same variable now, or the same variable array. We still could probably make this a little simpler. So a2 is equal to in.nextInt. So we could say system.out.println, the sum is a0 plus a1 plus a2, and we haven't used the rest of the array. We declared it with 5 spaces. So javac variable test.java, java variable test. So we can enter 1, 2, and 3, and you see we get the same result. Let's go ahead back into it. Let's say we set this to only be 2. So now we have an integer array that has 2 spaces. So we have a space for 0, and we have a space for 1, but we don't have any more. So this is our 0, this is our 1. What happens now? So let's go ahead and close our file, we'll save it. Java C variable test.java, Java variable test, and if we enter 1, 2, and 3, and now we get an exception. We get an array index out of bounds exception saying basically we've declared an array of size 2 and we've tried to put 3 things into it. So just to show you where that happens, right here, this A2, we never actually said that we would use it. We only said we're going to use 2 spots. Now, we can make this a lot bigger. We can make this a lot easier to use. I'm going to go ahead and cut these lines out. And instead, one of the great things about arrays is that they work very well with loops. So I can say int a is equal to new int, we'll say 5 this time, and we can use for int I is equal to 0, I is less than a dot length, I plus plus. We'll go ahead and tell the user system.out.println enter 5 integers. So we can now use ai is equal to in.nextInt. So what we've done here is we've told the user to enter 5 integers. Then on this next line, for int I equals 0. So that's just reviewing the loop that we worked on last, or one of the last lessons. I is less than a.length. A.length tells us how many values are in the array. And it's useful that we use a.length because what happens if we change the int array declaration here to 8? Now we don't have to change this line. And when we're writing code, we really want to try to avoid having to change our code based on decisions that we've made in other places in the code. We really want to make it so that if we're dealing with values or we're dealing with variables, we use those or we use constants to not have to rewrite our code all over the place. So we could just say 8, but then if I want to change this to 10, we also have to change this to 10. So it's much easier to just use a.length. So we'll take that back to 5. So now we're going to ask for those 5 values. We're going to iterate through this, and we're going to assign each one of the values of a to the next integer. So we'll start with the 0. I will be 0, then I will be 1, then I will be 2, then I will be 3, then I will be 4, and when we get to the next iteration, I will be, when it's 5, it will be not be less than a.length, so our loop will terminate. So now we can actually use another loop if we want to go ahead and add those together. So we could say int sum is equal to 0, for int I is equal to 0, I is less than a.length, I plus plus, we'll say sum plus equals a of I. So now we're not using here in a of I, we're actually using a variable to identify the position in the array. It's still just going to be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, but we're using that variable to identify that. Now we can tell the user the sum. System.out.println the sum is sum. So now if we enter these, we'll say 4, 8, 2, 5, and 5. We get 24. So now if we wanted to make additional changes, we could just make this a much larger number, or we could make this a smaller number. So arrays allow us to create these groupings of variables that make it much more useful when we're trying to do iterative tasks. You can have arrays of any of the primitives. You can have arrays of any type of object. In a future lesson, we'll go over an array of objects that we can use to represent a deck of cards. But right now, this should give you the basic principles behind arrays. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to practice your coding.